This is a quadrascopic stereo 3D lenticular camera, which essentially means a camera with 4 lenses, which will shoot, in this case, 2 full frames of 35mm simultaneously, creating 4 half frames on those 2 frames of 35. So this is a really interesting branch of film photography all to itself, and realistically 35mm even more specifically, in the fact that you can do something very specific with these images once you get them developed. In fact, one of the most recent uses of these kinds of photos that I find really interesting is how people have put them inside music videos to add a little bit of old school vintage flair to the video itself. Which brings us to the point of this video where we ask, how do we take these 35mm photos and then interlace them and make them into rotating or moving GIFs? Well, here's one example. This is called the Nimslo 3D. Now this camera specifically is very point and shoot in the fact that you really only get to make one choice, and that is how you're going to expose your film. Everything else is automatic other than the ISO setting, which allows you to choose either 100 or 400 depending on what kind of film you want to put into it. Everything else from there, the camera's going to do for you. And then when you take that idea of point and shoot and combine it with the fact that this camera does take a battery, which also helps with exposure compensation, I think it's really useful because essentially, basically, that point and shoot style on top of the fact that it does give you a red and green indicator for proper exposure inside the viewfinder through the little window, which you'll see, I think it's really helpful for just about any sort of photographer that's going to pick up this kind of camera. So it's one that just about anybody I could recommend it to is going to enjoy it. Now when it comes to film photography, the beginning of this process is generally the same. You're going to shoot your film photos, then get your film photos developed, whether you do them at home or you send them to a lab, and then you're going to go about scanning your photos, and then from there all of the magic actually happens inside Photoshop. So for me personally, what I like to do is start off with, like I've said before, home development, because typically when I develop my film at home, this means that I can do it cheaper, I can do it faster, typically I can do more rolls at the same time, so it saves me a lot of time and effort when it comes to development. So that's kind of where I begin the process. After that, I move into scanning. Now there are typically 3 things that I use for my scanning process. One is my Epson V600 flatbed scanner, 2 is actually ViewScan for my software, and then 3, once I have my negatives out of ViewScan, I use Negative Lab Pro inside Lightroom because it really integrates well. You don't have to use any of these 3 things, but for me, this is kind of my process. But realistically, however you choose to do it, once you have your negatives turned into positives and edited if you want them to be, all of the magic really happens inside Photoshop. Now these are some of the most interesting photos in my opinion, because when you take a photo from basically the very beginning and then you're going to take it through scanning and developing and putting it through Lightroom and then inevitably through Photoshop in order to get it to the point where you're ready to have a looping GIF, I really find it interesting because it's something that you can do with these photos that you can't with other photos that are made by 35mm or any other film camera for that aspect. I find it really interesting because they are just so different. And just as a side note for everyone wondering how to make those really cool 80s or 90s kind of like flashy photos, realistically it's all about direct subject flash. So make sure to click that link that just came up on the top of this window and check it out because it's all about direct subject flash, which I've talked about previously, but realistically, just as a hint, it's all about adding flash. So make sure if you're going to shoot like a big portrait or something for these kinds of photos, use a flash. And that's realistically it. That's how you take something like this and turn it into a 3D rotating, moving GIF straight from 35mm film. But now's the time, if you haven't already, make sure you go check out my links for Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, all linked down below in the description. If you want to see more of this kind of content or just more of my photography in general, please go leave me some love there. I would love to see you guys interacting with me on those platforms as well. I would love to hear your thoughts as far as Nimslo or 3D film or film in general. Just let me know all of that stuff in one of those links down below. But for now, I'm going to hit you with my typical peace out, and I will see you guys in the next one. Make sure to leave me some comments down below about Nimslo and 3D film, and especially the VHS footage I interlaid with this. I would love to know if you guys noticed that kind of stuff. That's real film, by the way. That's real VHS film. So let me know what you think about it in the comments. But peace.